Hello, we will just wait for a few more people to join our live before we get going. Hi, good evening. Hi Greg. Hi Dean. Fab, we're just going to wait a couple more minutes before we get started. Hope everyone's had a good Monday, last Monday before Christmas. And probably the last Monday you got to work of the year, because next Monday is bank holiday. So unless you're in a job that requires you to work bank holidays, you'll have it off. I certainly had a very busy one today and have not stopped. But hopefully you guys have had it a bit more chilled. Hi Peter. Fab, we've got a few of you that have joined now, so we will get started, and anyone that comes in a little bit later can always join. I just want to check you guys can all hear me. My headphones got broken, so I can't plug them in, but hopefully you can hear just from me speaking. But I'll try and speak up nice and clearly. Perhaps even put my tree lights on, otherwise it might have ended up blinding some of you. So today we are talking about rotator cuff injuries and the recovery for them. So with the rotator cuff, we can have a traumatic injury to it, or we can have something that's atraumatic. So traumatic would be something like what we call a foosh. So that would be a fall on an outstretched hand, so falling over and landing on your hand. Often that can then give you a little shunt back into the shoulder. A foosh can cause an injury to hand, wrist, elbow. It can be bony, it can be ligament, it can be tendons, anything, obviously at the shoulder as well. So you can get a few different injuries as a result of that, but rotator cuff is one of them. With our atraumatic rotator cuff injuries, so these are ones that generally happen slowly and over time. That is what we tend to see more commonly with rotator cuff injuries. It tends to be that with age we get tears within the rotator cuff tendons, and that then causes us that pain that we feel. With our traumatic rotator cuff injuries, often as well this is associated with a dislocation. So that might be you're playing a sport, you're playing rugby, something like that, and you've dislocated your shoulder at the same time, and subsequently you've got damage to the shoulder. Obviously in those cases the recovery is going to be a little bit different, because we're not just looking at it from a rotator cuff injury, we're looking at it from a stability standpoint as well. Clearly we don't have loads of stability if we've ended up with a dislocated shoulder, or we've had a lot of force going through that shoulder in order to cause that dislocation. So today, other than tears that might have happened as a result of kind of falls and that kind of thing, it's mainly going to be looking at that gradual over time pain that we get in the shoulder as a result of the rotator cuff being injured. So small tears, small to medium tears at the rotator cuff tendons, and tendons attach muscles to bones. So all of the rotator cuff muscles, of which there are 4, and we'll go through them in a minute, have got muscle and they've got tendon either side, because that's generally how most sort of muscle tendons are built up. But with our small to medium tears, these are often asymptomatic, so you don't even realise you've got them. If someone were to scan your shoulder and you've got no pain, they might actually find a tear in one of the rotator cuff muscles, but not actually you might not actually have any pain in them. So that's obviously quite interesting to see. Large tears that are 3 to 5 centimetres, they often are painful, and massive tears are considered to be anything above 5 centimetres. Excuse me. So with our ones that are above 5 centimetres, that can obviously cause a lot more pain for most as well. And your rotator cuff is made up of muscles and tendons, and they keep the ball of your humerus, so the top bit of your humerus, top bit of your upper arm bone, in your shoulder socket. And they all have different movements that allows your shoulder to move, basically. So our supraspinatus, one of our rotator cuff muscles, brings our arm out to about 30 degrees. So we call it abduction, but only to about 30 degrees, and then other muscles take over. We've then got our infraspinatus, and that does external rotation. So that's that movement here, or out to the side if I'm at neutral. I would move back, but I'll end up taking my tree out, so I'll have to move to the side to show you. We've got our teres minor, which are similar movements again, and we've got our subscapularis as well. Our subscapularis sits underneath our shoulder blade at the back, and that does adduction, so bringing the arm in, and internal rotation, so like that, or the downward action here. But although they've all got these different movements, they all co-contract together when your arm is in space, or if you're moving, they come together to then increase the negative pressure in the shoulder joint in order to keep the capsule nice and almost like suctioned in, a bit like, you know, if you've got in the shower the see-through like squishy things that you try and stick to the walls, you know, if you've got it on like a puffer or something, you know, that pressure is what keeps it there. Really similar kind of action in your shoulder. So it's important that all these muscles are working together and that they're all of sort of a similar strength level. If you've got some that are disproportionately stronger than others, that's when you can also end up with an imbalance in the shoulder that can cause problems. So the first thing I wanted to discuss today as well is, do you need surgery if you've had a rotator cuff tear? Because it's very common that people say, you know, I've got a large tear, it's over 5 centimeters, it's this big, do I need to have surgery? Well, actually, I wanted to do a bit of research before I did this live, because there's obviously new research coming out all the time, so I just wanted to make sure that I was up to date with the latest research. And there was a meta-analysis done, and a meta-analysis is where you look at lots of different, normally ideally high quality studies. You pull all of that information together, so you kind of then can give an even better answer than those individual studies, because you look at everything. So they found that at 12 months, those that had surgery versus those that hadn't, so 12 months after surgery, for those that have had it, and those that hadn't 12 months since they started rehab, had very similar outcomes. So actually, you know, they had pain and function, quality of life was all very similar 12 months after. So it kind of shows you that surgery probably in many ways isn't the best option, because there's risks associated with surgery. You know, there is the potential to get an infection, there's a potential, and that's in the wound, but there's also potential to get other infections whilst in the hospital. Things like MRSA, pneumonia, COVID, you know, anything like that you can catch in the hospital, and you are more likely to, versus being at home. Obviously risk with anaesthetic as well, not everyone gets on well with that. You then got to have a period of time, not normally long, but a little bit of time where you're immobilised afterwards, and you are going to be likely more debilitated for a period of time after your surgery, rather than just doing conservative management. So conservative management, by that we just mean physio. So I think there's actually a really good sort of case for not having surgery now, where previously we thought, okay, if you've got a larger tear, then you need to have surgery. All of the research actually points us in the direction that if your results are going to be the same, why bother going under the knife? There's just, you know, there's very little point. But that, interestingly as well, that big meta-analysis study did also say that although exercise and physiotherapy seems to be the best management, there's no set method that is followed for rehab. I did look at a few other studies as well, because I know what I do in my clinic that works really successfully for those that have rotator cuff injuries, but it's always good to see if there's anything that has been really prescribed in the research, and there's not. So that tells us that we can basically just keep following on with what we're doing with patients, unless something comes out that says this is the exact protocol we should use. So the first thing that I always try and do with people that have got a rotator cuff injury is get their pain under control. You know, some people might be in large amounts of pain. Often the typical ones I see is people going, I can't put my jacket on, because it's that sort of movement as you put a jacket on. So if you've had a rotator cuff injury and you're on this call, it would be great if you could put some of your symptoms in the comments in this call, on this video, some of your symptoms that you've had in the comments, or things that you struggle to do. People that have had children often struggle to like turn around in the car and help them with seat belts and things like that. Like I said, putting on the jacket is often painful. Often you get what we call a painful arc, so you can kind of get up to here, but like anything there is a bit painful. So the first thing that I do is manage the pain, and that can be through saying, look, now might be time to take a few painkillers, as much as you maybe don't want to. If you take some painkillers, the pain reduces, and then we can do some exercises. We can get into a bit of a rhythm of it. If you've got too much pain that you then can't do any exercise, you end up just stuck in this cycle of getting weaker in that time and not stronger. So and yeah, initially it's that pain management. And so I also advise people to use ice and heat. There is absolutely no research to suggest that either one will help with any inflammation that you may or may not have. Often with tendon injuries you won't have inflammation anyway, but it can be a good adjunct to help someone just reduce that pain down for them a little bit as well. And avoid doing anything that's really aggravating it. With tendon injuries generally, my rule of thumb is when we're exercising, if you've got a bit of pain and like a discomfort level of pain, it's fine to continue exercising and doing that exercise. If you've got agony, then obviously not, because it's going to make it worse. Or if you're doing an exercise and then you notice that you've got pain for quite a few hours after the exercise, or it's worse the next day, we know that you pushed it a little bit too far. Maybe that exercise isn't appropriate for you yet, or maybe we need to alter the sets and reps. So yeah, exercising in pain with a rotator cuff tendon injury isn't actually bad per se. It's just making sure that you find the right level, as it were. So that's the first thing that we do. I then would start with range of motion exercises. Not that everyone who has got a rotator cuff injury actually has problems with range of motion. Some people don't have any issues at all. So it's obviously going to be depending on what's appropriate. So I said that I was going to give some examples in this video as well of exercises. If someone is struggling with range of motion, one of the things I get them to do is what we call a pendulum with the shoulder. I will try and show you. So that would be where I'm going to use this hand for support, and this hand I'm going to just do figures of 8s. Or I could write the alphabet, could write my phone number, whatever I wanted to do. So I'm just literally hanging the arm and just kind of writing with it. So that's one of the exercises that I would do in that stage for people that are struggling with rotator cuff injuries. The other thing that I am with range of motion with rotator cuff injuries, another thing that I might get them to do is to walk their hand up a wall. So you've got the wall in front of you and you're walking it up until you kind of get it a bit more straight. And they're great range of motion exercises to do, just to try and get that movement back and extend just external rotation, internal rotation. Sometimes I just get them to hold a stick, push one way, push the other way as well. But like I said, everyone's going to be at different levels. So some people that's going to be really easy for them. I'm not going to bother doing it because their range of motion is already good. But for those that are struggling, they're the ones I'm going to use. And then I go on to isometric exercises. Again, this stage can be skipped for people that are a little bit higher level who haven't got as much pain. But for some people, it's going to be really important to do our isometric exercises. So isometric exercises are ones where the muscle is contracting, but the joint isn't moving. So an example would be if I have my arm out here, nearly had a ball down there, arm out here, if I was pushing against it with my other hand, this is isometric flexion, because I'm trying to put my shoulder into flexion, my other arm's stopping it. So I'm contracting all of those muscles that allow me to do flexion, but I'm not moving the arm. It's staying still. Isometrics are amazing for tendons for 2 reasons. 1, they help us build up the strength, but 2, they also help with reducing the pain that you're feeling at a joint as well. So sometimes I'll give isometrics almost as a bit of a warm-up before giving people other kind of slightly harder exercises to do as well. And the isometrics you can do in any direction. So basically I would go with whichever direction is most painful for you, which might be coming out to the side, it might be external or internal rotation. I'd do an isometric in that range, and ideally in a non-painful part of the range. So that'd be the first thing I'd start with. The next thing I'd move to would be sort of doing concentric and eccentric exercises. So that means exercises where we're moving, basically, where the limb and the joint is moving. So that's mainly going to focus on a mixture of things, but primarily I want not just the rotator cuff muscles, but I want all of the muscles in and around that area to be nice and strong. I want the back muscles really strong, I want all the muscles at the shoulder really strong, in the arm as well. So for those ones, I might start with some more dynamic rotator cuff exercises. I don't tend to do it standing in this position. I tend to get people lying on their side and going up and down instead. And the reason for that is, if I'm standing up here, I can cheat a little bit. I can use my biceps, I can get a little bit more stability, and I'm kind of gravity neutral. I'm lying on my side, I'm working against gravity. So I've got to work that a little bit harder, but I also take the biceps out of action, and that forces my rotator cuff to work harder, basically my external, my internal rotators of the rotator cuff. So that's the kind of thing that I would then move on to. I might try what we call some scaption stuff. So that is where we've got our abduction, which is here. We've got our kind of flexion plane, which is here. And in between the two, we have what we call scaption. And sometimes that's quite a nice plane to get people working in because it's just less painful for them. And we can build a bit of strength there before we then move back to the other planes. So that'll be the next thing that I tend to do with people. And from there, I then want to start combining upper and lower exercises at the same time. If you think about how the human body works and what we do on a day-to-day basis, how many times do you use your upper body when you're not using your lower body? So for example, if you're in the kitchen and you're trying to reach for a plate and it's in the top of the cupboard, you're still standing on your feet, and you might even be going on your tiptoes if you're a bit short and can't reach the top of your cupboard. Often we are, or if you're thinking of a sport, for example, think of a tennis serve. You've still got a lot going on in your legs whilst trying to do an upper body movement. So you want to be able to combine the two, because also what we're tying in there is the core, because the core and the hips are basically moving or helping translate the movement in between upper and lower body and combine it. So you want to make sure we start adding those in. That's kind of harder to be a bit more prescriptive with on a very general Zoom, because obviously it depends on what sport you're doing, what you're trying to get back to. But even some simple things would just be standing on one leg and doing an exercise. Throughout this time as well, I'm going to be adding in some proprioceptive exercises and just making them harder along the way. So proprioception is knowing where your joints are in relation to space. So an example of that would be, I can have my eyes open and put my hand here. If I shut my eyes, I can meet pretty much bang on, I'm slightly out, with the other side. I can meet my hands. And the reason I can do that is because I have a feedback loop that says hand is here, goes to the brain, tells me that my hand's there. I can then meet it with the other side. When we've got an injury, that feedback loop is often interrupted. So we want to be able to retrain it. So some of the proprioceptive exercises that I might start with would be just having a ball straight out in front of me on a wall and going around in circles like that. Small circles either side. And you can do that with a small ball, you can do it with a bigger ball. You could then do it eyes open, eyes shut, standing on one leg, standing on a cushion. And then you can progress it to make it harder by doing things like holding a band and coming up and down. You can do a bottoms up kettlebell carry. So if you've seen a kettlebell, you know you've got the bell bit at the bottom, and then you've got the handle. You can hold it upside down so the bell bit is at the top, arms above your head, and you can march with it if you want to, or you can do it down here to make it a little bit easier first. So they're all the kind of things that I would add in. And also, again, depending on sport as well. So if we look at rugby players, and I say rugby players because I often see rotator cuff injuries in rugby players, and I see a lot in clinic. I know from the research that joint sensor positions, that proprioceptive feedback loop, is not as good after 10 tackles. The average player does make more than 10 tackles in a game. So if I'm trying to get you back from injury, not only do I have to make sure your proprioceptive feedback loop is good, I want it to be better than it was before, because I don't want you to get injured on the 11th tackle. I want you to be able to do 20 tackles or more, without getting injured. So for those kind of players, I'm often going to do proprioceptive exercises under exhaustion. So I'm going to wait till they've done all their upper body training, all their rugby training, and then I'm going to give them some more proprioceptive exercises to do. So I'm making it a bit harder, and I'm making them work under fatigue. I'm making that feedback loop remain there even when they're really tired, and even when that joint is like, no, I'm done. And the other things as well that I would do for them are things like they might have their arm on the wall and the ball with their eyes shut. I might be trying to hit their arm off. So having to then maintain that position, even though they can't see it, whilst I'm hitting them. Yeah, don't come to my clinic, I hit people. But yeah, so one of those like really good exercises that I find for proprioception, and proprioceptive exercises generally I'll use for lots of different shoulder injuries. It's not just rotator cuff, but it is one of those times that you'd want to be doing it. And then I'd want to be following up with some plyometric exercises. So after we've done our exercises where we're using that concentric and eccentric contraction already, and we've done our upper and lower limb combination stuff, our plyometric things would be things like press-ups with a bit of a push-off, for example, or it might be some medicine ball throws. Again, all depends on what people need to get back to. If I've got a 70-year-old that's got a rotator cuff tear who just wants to make sure their dog doesn't feel like they're going to pull their arm out their socket when they're walking with them, I'm probably not going to need to do quite as much plyometric training as I am a basketball player, for example. So, but they're all the kind of things that you can then add in. And then we start to look at more sport-specific movements and returning to sport. So if your sport, for example, let's use tennis initially, often I get to the them to practice doing a tennis serve without even having a racket in place, they're just doing the motion. Then I might add a band or a cable for a bit of resistance, and then letting them use their racket, and then gradually increase the amount of serves that they can do. So, because that's often, I say serve just because that's normally the movement that aggravates tennis players the most that have got rotator cuff injuries. So I might say initially, look, I'm going to let you do 5 fast-paced serves, and then you're going to do 5 slow serves, for example, with this much break in between. And then we'll increase it up because we want to be making it harder and harder and harder. So yeah, that's basically the process that I would follow for someone with a rotator cuff injury. We initially start reducing your pain, then we go into active range of motion again, if that's needed. Some people aren't as bad as that. Isometric exercises, concentric eccentric exercises, upper and lower limb combined exercises, plyometric exercises, sport specific, and back into sport, making sure that we're doing proprioception throughout all of that. So I hope that's given you a good idea of the journey that you can follow. If anyone's got any questions, now is the time to ask, so I'll give you a minute or two to do that. Fab, I don't think we've got any questions, but as always, if you do, please feel free to drop me a message or comment underneath on this video, and I will get back to you. But thank you so much for joining. I hope that you found that useful as sort of rotator cuff injury recovery live. Oh, Greg, I'm pleased that you found it helpful. Thank you. Have a lovely evening and a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We won't have lives for the next 2 weeks of the bank holidays, but we will be back second week of Jan. Bye.